Petaluma, California, only 38 miles north of San Francisco. An artists' community full of original Victorian gingerbread and pleasant walkable streets and lanes. You see, Petaluma was spared the ravages of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. When other Bay Area cities were leveled by that earthquake, Petaluma was allowed to keep its treasure trove of spectacular architecture. Long before this 1906 earthquake, in 1879, Lyman Bice invented the chicken egg incubator. The incubator industrialized egg production and put Petaluma on the map. The once sleepy little town became a powerhouse of egg production, an economic giant, and gave people something to crow about. Lyman Bice and his egg incubator made Petaluma the egg basket of the world. Today, this fragile egg basket, along with the revitalized downtown full of antique buildings, is being threatened. A phalanx of big box chain stores are rocking the egg basket and threatening to build their unique style of big box monoliths just outside of town. If allowed to build, each site will take economic aim directly at Petaluma's downtown.
It's almost like kudzu, the growth of these big boxes. It's like this invasive, non-native species that starts taking over the environment.
I think that there is quite a bit of evidence that these retailers take far more out of our local economies than they put back in. Let me give you some of the dismal statistics. During the 1990s, we lost 5,000 independent hardware stores in this country. Home Depot and Lowe's, which barely existed 20 years ago, now control about half of all hardware and building supply sales nationally. About half of all independent bookstores closed. Barnes & Noble and Borders, again, barely existed 20 years ago. They now control half of all bookstore sales in this country. It seems that every category there are 2 or 3 big companies that have come really to capture much of the spending in those categories nationwide.
Some of the chains are still building rapidly, but I think we may already be nearing the peak of the big box era. You know, we're sitting in a nation that has about 10 times the retail space per square foot as our economic peers in Western Europe, for example. You know, can that really sustain itself? Or is this a bubble that may be getting ready to burst sometime? Well, many of the antitrust laws that we have date back to the 1930s, and that actually came on the heels of the last major anti-chain store movement in the country. Back in the late 1920s, you know, for example, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, A&P grocery stores, was a dominant force. They had well over 10,000 stores across the country, and at the time it was probably unimaginable that anyone would ever displace them. But there was a huge citizen backlash. Citizens enacted chain store taxes in at least 13 different states, I believe. And it's an example to look back on and say, well, we can do that again. We can. Unfortunately, many of those antitrust laws that were enacted to prevent exactly the kind of oligopolies and monopolies we're seeing develop today have gone largely unenforced for decades now.
Used to be that there was having a job was a mark of social responsibility. That's how a person, you would demonstrate that you were socially responsible by going out and getting a job, and that would pay your bills, and you could buy a house and buy a car, and that meant that you were, a real person. You had fulfilled your social function. Which people are working in shell jobs, where you're only given, maybe 24, 28 hours a week, not enough you're below the level where you're eligible for benefits. So you're having to work patch together 2 or 3 of these jobs. None of them together constitutes a living. What it's creating is these economic sinkholes in entire communities where people are working, okay, like the level, the unemployment rate is down, But that does not equal to prosperity, because these muck jobs are not serving the needs of the people who are working at them. Recognize that these big box stores are part of a pernicious business model, which is basically, it's almost like strip mining the resources of the community.
The conventional wisdom out there about this trend is that it's progress. You know, we might mourn the loss of the little pharmacy or the local bookstore, but, you know, this is the way things are. This is the march of progress, as it were, and these companies really are, the big boxes are really the future, and there's nothing much we can do about it. After doing all of this sort of research and looking at all of these pieces of what the economic ramifications are, it finally sort of dawned on me that what really is an apt metaphor for this. This is not progress. It doesn't look like progress at all. The conventional wisdom, I think, is really wrong. What it looks like is colonialism. You know, you've got, it's very much like those countries, you know, European superpowers that went into Africa and other parts of the world. I mean, their goal was not to enrich the local inhabitants. It was to extract and appropriate their wealth.
Well, I think there's kind of a fatalistic attitude still on the part of some people and communities that, well, you know, it's lousy that the transnational chains are coming in, driving out our local businesses, but that's, you know, that's the way the world is going. That's globalization. Well, that's absolute nonsense, and we're seeing that proven in community after community, that when citizens get together, organize proactively, determine that, hey, this is something that's important in our community. We want to keep our independent businesses alive, whether it's in, you know, neighborhood districts, in our downtown, that it can be done. Because at every level of government presently, we have a wide range of policies that really are largely favoring the large, the absentee, the chain-owned businesses, very often to the detriment of America's entrepreneurs.
People say to me, well, this is the free market. People are voting with their dollars, you know. This is the way it is. They're choosing the big box. They must see a value in that. Walmart and Home Depot and Target, all of these companies have risen to dominance not solely because of consumer choices. They have been aided and abetted in no small part by public policy. You know, every year in this country, cities and towns give away hundreds of millions of dollars in development subsidies.